Hey Adventures, so as I have been doing for the past I think every year that I've been on this channel, March 25th is Tolkien Reading Day. And so I've tried to look into a topic that interests me for some reason, that's caught my attention for whatever reason it might be. And this year I've decided to look into the origin of the dwarves. And there's not a whole lot on the origin of the dwarves. There's not a ton of information, but there's some really interesting things that I find particularly interesting. And I think depending on your perspective, depending on the way that you look at things, could be either confusing or could be things that you don't really agree with or don't really believe could be possible. And so I think that actually interests me all the more. And so I want to dig in just very shortly. I'm not going to go super into the weeds with all of this, but I do find it an interesting topic, so I want to look at it really quickly. The information that I'm pulling from is actually from the appendices, Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, Appendix A, and then the Silmarillion chapter, which it should be in the Vala Quinta. There is chapter 2, and that's of Aule and Yavanna, and there's just a little bit of information on them in that book as well. And so I want to look at both of those real quickly, and I'll make some comments as I come across them, or as I wrap things up or whatever. After I'm mostly going to be reading from the books themselves, because it's easier to take the information directly from Tolkien than to try and rephrase it myself. All right, so starting in Appendix A, there's the last section in Appendix A is it's part 3, and that's Durin's folk. And of course, Durin is the dwarf, and we'll see a little bit of that as we look in here. But basically, this is about the dwarves and a lot about their culture. It kind of digs into their culture a little bit. But in this passage, we see, concerning the beginning of the dwarves, strange tales are told both by the Eldar and by the dwarves themselves. But since these things lie far back beyond our days, little is said of them here. Durin is the name that the dwarves used for the eldest of the 7 fathers of their race, and the ancestor of all the kings of the Longbeards. He slept alone until, in the deeps of time and the awakening of that people, he came to Azanulbizar, and in the caves above Kheled-Zaram, in the east of the Misty Mountains, he made his dwelling, where afterwards were the mines of Moria, renowned in song. So that's really the information that we received there. There's a little bit more about their history and what how they came to be the way that they are during the events of the Third Age, which is what the Lord of the Rings deals with, is the end of the Third Age. And so the appendices are also dealing with that same topic. So I'm going to set that aside for now, because that's really all the information that we received there, is that one of the eldest and first of the dwarves to awaken was Durin. And he's known as the Deathless, as there's things that some of that, let's see, I guess the next sentence of the next paragraph says, there he lived so long that he was known far and wide as Durin the Deathless. And then there's some cultural ideas about Durin and what's going on with him that are carried forward into the rest of the culture of the dwarves. But for the most part, I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to go now and look at the chapter of Aule and Yavanna, and we'll see what that book has to say. All right, so reading here, it is told that in their beginning the dwarves were made by Aule in the darkness of Middle-earth, for so greatly did Aule desire the coming of the children, to have learners to whom he could teach his lore and his crafts, that he was unwilling to await the fulfillment of the designs of Iluvatar. And Aule made the dwarves even as they still are, because the forms of the children who were to come were unclear to his mind, and because the power of Melkor was yet over the earth. And he wished, therefore, that they should be strong and unyielding, but fearing that the other Valar might blame his work, he wrought in secret. And he made first the 7 fathers of the dwarves in a hall under the mountains in Middle-earth. So right there, we get really the history of these characters, how they were created, how they came to be. And that is that Aule, desiring to have somebody to teach his skills and his craft to, but first off, the children of Iluvatar, meaning the elves and the humans, had not yet been awoken, and so he couldn't teach them. And so he wanted to create something that he could teach his craft, his ability with crafting and smithing to that. So he created these dwarves to fulfill that purpose. He was impatient. But then we also get here a note about, and he made first the 7 fathers of the dwarves in a hall under the mountains in Middle-earth. So that's again referencing the 7 fathers of the dwarves, which we saw a little bit in the Appendix A. And one of those 7 fathers of the dwarves is, of course, Durin the First, or Durin the Deathless. All right, let's continue here, because there's some more information that I find that's getting really into the interesting stuff. Of course, they were crafted and created by Aule, and that's the origin of them right there. That's the origin of the dwarves. But continuing on, now Iluvatar knew what was done. Of course, Eru Iluvatar is God. He's omniscient, all-knowing, and so he knows obviously that Aule is creating these dwarves, and that's not a contradiction. That makes perfect sense when you understand the way that Tolkien was viewing Eru Iluvatar as basically God, the Christian God or the Hebrew God Yahweh. And so it's that same idea, that same character, this omniscient being who's also omnipotent, and which is all powerful, and omnipresent, which is everywhere all at once. So let's continue here. So now Iluvatar knew what was done. Makes sense because of who Iluvatar is. And in the very hour that Aule's work was complete, and he was pleased, he being Aule, and began to instruct the dwarves in the speech that he had devised for them, Iluvatar spoke to him. So Aule completes his work. He looks at him and says, "These are really cool. I like this. Let's start teaching you how to talk so that I can communicate with you." And as soon as he starts doing that, Iluvatar says, "Aule." And Aule heard his voice and was silent. And the voice of Iluvatar said to him, "Why hast thou done this? Why dost thou attempt a thing which thou knowest is beyond thy power and thy authority? For thou hast from me, as a gift, thine own being only, and no more. And therefore the creatures of thy hand and mind can live only by that being, moving when thou thinkest to move them, and if thy thought be elsewhere, standing idle. Is that thy desire?" And so he asks this question of Aule because Aule is not omnipotent. He doesn't have all power, and so he can't create life in the same way that Eru, God, can. Iluvatar is how he's being referred to here. Then Aule answered, "I did not desire such lordship. I desired things other than I am, to love and to teach them, so that they too might perceive the beauty of Ea," which here Ea is the earth, "which thou hast caused to be. For it seemed to me that there is great room in Arda for many things that might rejoice in it. Yet it is for the most part empty still, and dumb. And in my impatience I have fallen into folly. Yet the making of things is in my heart from my own making by thee. And the child of little understanding, that makes a play of the deeds of his father, may do so without thought of mockery, but because he is the son of his father. But what shall I do now, so that thou be not angry with me forever? As a child to his father, I offer to these things, the work of the hands which thou hast made. Do with them what thou wilt. But should I not rather destroy the work of my presumption?" And so here, Aule is saying, "Oh, I messed up. I'm sorry. I see now that I made a mistake in trying to create these beings." And he says it right there, the work of my presumption. He presumed that he could do something that he did not have the authority to do. But Aule is speaking to Iluvatar as one would speak to their father. And Aule is saying, "I'm sorry, Dad. I was just imitating you because these are the things that you taught me to do, and I was so fascinated. I just wanted to do like you do," which is a very human thing. That's a very normal thing to want to do, is for a son to imitate his father. And so there's no ill will. There's nothing. What did he say here? Without thought of mockery. He didn't intend this to be in mockery of Iluvatar, but rather as a way to honor and to imitate his father. All right, let's continue here, though. Then Aule took up a great hammer to smite the dwarves, and he wept. Aule is sad that he has to destroy that he's thinking that destroying his creations is the choice that Iluvatar would want for him. So he takes up his hammer to smite and destroy the dwarves. But Iluvatar had compassion upon Aule and his desire because of his humility. And the dwarves shrank from the hammer and were afraid. And they bowed their heads and begged for mercy. So we see right there that Iluvatar had compassion upon Aule and his desire. So after Aule tells Iluvatar what his thought process was going into this, which of course Iluvatar being God already knows this, already understands, but he's wanting Aule to commune with his father, with Iluvatar, to have that conversation, to understand, to help this lesser being in Aule to understand better his father's will. And so he has this conversation, and then he says, the book says that, but Iluvatar had compassion upon Aule and his desire. And he specifically says because of his humility, that humility that I messed up, I made a mistake, I repent, I give this to you, tell me what to do, tell me what you want me to do. Because Aule had that right heart. It continues after it goes through, the dwarves shrank from the hammer and were afraid, and they bowed down their heads and begged for mercy. And the voice of Iluvatar said to Aule, thy offer I accepted, even as it was made. And I'll pause there for a moment because that's an important point. He accepted the offer even as it was made, which when you go back and look at that, it says, as a child to his father, I offer to thee these things. That's just an important point to look at really quickly, to make note of. The offer I accepted, even as it was made. Dost thou not see that these things have now a life of their own, and speak with their own voices? Else they would not have flinched from thy blow, nor from any command of thy will. Then Aule cast down his hammer and was glad, and he gave thanks to Iluvatar, saying, may Eru bless my work and amend it. So that's, Iluvatar says, I accepted your offer, I have given these beings life, and you can tell because they cowered from the blow that you sought to smite them with. And I think that kind of explains how these beings can have life when they are created not by the life giver. All right. I think there's a little bit more in here. There is a little bit more in here about how the dwarves came to be within the realm of Middle-earth and how they were awoken and everything. And so I want to go through that too, because I think that's an important piece to the history and the origins of the dwarves as well. But Iluvatar spoke again and said, even as I gave being to the thoughts of the Ainur at the beginning of the world, so now I have taken up thy desire and given to it a place therein. But in no other way will I amend thy handiwork, and as thou hast made it, so shall it be. So Iluvatar is saying there, the way that you created the dwarves, that's going to stay. The only thing that I've changed is that I've given them a life of their own. But I will not suffer this, that these should come before the firstborn of my design, nor that thy impatience should be rewarded. So, of course, Iluvatar is saying the elves and the men have to awake first, and so the dwarves cannot awake first. They shall sleep now in the darkness under stone, and shall not come forth until the firstborn have awakened upon earth. And until that time thou and they shall wait, though long it seem. But when the time comes, I will awaken them, and they shall be to thee as children, and often strife shall arise between thine and mine, the children of my adoption and the children of my choice. And Tolkien, of course, being Catholic, he understands the way that he understands how the Bible and how Hebrew people have relationships with the people around them and the other people groups around them and everything. He understands that, and he's pulling that same idea into this. It's the Silmarillion here in the creation of the elves and the humans versus the dwarves, because the dwarves he has adopted, but they're not his firstborn. They're not the ones that he had designed specifically for the role. And so there's going to be a little bit of strife between those two people because they are not the same. Anyways, let's continue. Then Aule took the 7 fathers of the dwarves, again we have reference to those, and laid them to rest in far sundered places, and he returned to Valinor and waited while the long years lengthened. So that's kind of the end of the dwarves. We don't really have anything else. He took them and scattered them throughout Middle-earth. It doesn't actually specifically say that he scattered them, but he put them in Middle-earth in a different place and allowed them to rest and to sleep until such time as the firstborn have awakened, and then the dwarves can also awaken. Since they were to come in the days of the power of Melkor, Aule made the dwarves strong to endure. Therefore they are stone-hard, stubborn, fast in friendship and in enmity, and they suffer toil and hunger and hurt of body more heartily than all other speaking peoples. And they live long, far beyond the span of men, yet not forever. Aforetime it was held among the elves in Middle-earth, that dying the dwarves returned to the earth and the stone of which they were made. Yet that is not their own belief. For they say that Aule the Maker, whom they call Mahal, cares for them, and gathers them to Mandos in halls set apart, and that he declared to their fathers of old that Iluvatar would hallow them and give them a place among the children in the end. Then their part shall be to serve Aule, and to aid him in the remaking of Arda after the last battle. They say also that the 7 fathers of the dwarves return to live again in their own kin, and to bear once more their ancient names, of whom Durin was the most renowned in after ages, father of that kindred most friendly to the elves, whose mansions were at Khazad-dûm. So that's really the extent of the creation and origin of the dwarves. And of course, once they appear and once they come out into the world and are fighting with alongside the humans and the dwarves, the humans and the elves, and fighting against Melkor, they have a whole history in and of that, and they separate off into various different people groups and lots of different categories, I guess, if you want to say it that way, of dwarves. And so they do play a major role. But I really find this origins fascinating. This idea that Aule created them and they were bound to his will, they were bound to his life, and as they could only live and talk and move and breathe if Aule was paying attention to them, if Aule was working with them directly at that moment. And if he turned his thought away for whatever reason, they would stand still. They would turn back into stone, into the statues that they are. And Aule not grasping that concept when he created them, just wanting so greatly to have somebody that he could teach his own skill to. And so he's like, well, why don't I just create somebody so that I can do it? And he didn't think through the repercussions. He didn't think through what that would mean, how that was affecting things. And he just wanted to make something beautiful like his father, like Iluvatar did. But with an incomplete understanding and with an incomplete authority and power to be able to fully realize that dream that he was creating. But then he speaks to his father, and his father says, the work that you've done, you did it without understanding what you were doing, but I'm going to complete that work for you. And I have heard people say that it's not possible for him to have given them life before Aule was going to smite them and hurt and destroy them. I've heard that argument, and I don't see that. That's not what's written in the book itself. And of course, well, first off, this is fiction. This is not real life. This is not history. But you're playing with God. You're playing with a godlike being. You're writing this story where this character who, Iluvatar, who is presumed to be omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient. He knows all things. He is everywhere at once, and he's all powerful. I think that he has the ability to give life to a being from the moment, as he says in the book, from the thy offer I accepted, even as it was made. And so is immediately when Aule was saying, take these things that I tried to do and do with them as you will. Aule said, okay, and he gave them life. And then Aule picks up his hammer to smite them, and they cower away because they've just been given life, and they just now understand, and they just now are able to see what's going on. And I find that so cool. I find that fascinating, and I think that it's a great look at the character of Aule. It's a great look at the character of Iluvatar, but also it's just such a unique piece of lore for the history of the dwarves. And I think that's an important piece for their origins specifically. It definitely makes them different and unique from all the other races in Tolkien's Legendarium. So anyways, that's what I wanted to present. That's what I wanted to bring out. I really find that interesting, and it was stuck in my head, and I wrote it down, I don't know when, sometime around, I think it was before last year's, but I already had last year's planned, and so this is what was going to happen for this year. And it was a fascinating idea, a fascinating concept, and I said, okay, I'm gonna look into that just a little bit and explore it, because I think that it's really cool. So anyways, thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. I hope you have a fantastic Tolkien reading day, and we'll see you guys again soon. Stay well.